Hey friends, welcome to the Church Planting Podcast. I'm Greg Nettle and I serve as president of Stadia, where we want to help you start thriving, growing, multiplying churches for the next generation. Man, this is going to be an amazing episode of the Church Planting Podcast. My guest, Jon Ferguson, is a longtime friend. He's an author, he's a leader, he's dedicated to helping churches grow and thrive. He's the co-founding pastor of Community Christian Church in Chicagoland, where he's helped it grow from just a small group of people to multiple campuses, ministering to, empowering, and multiplying thousands upon thousands of people. Jon also is one of the founders of New Thing, a global church planting movement that supports over more than 1,000 churches all around the world. In addition to Jon's leadership roles, he's the author of books like Finding Your Way Back to God, The Big Idea, and Exponential. I've read many of Jon's books. We're going to talk a little bit about some of them today. Really excited to welcome Jon Ferguson to the Church Planting Podcast. Well, I'm here with my good friend, Jon Ferguson. My gosh, Jon, we've traveled globally together. We've worked on boards together side by side for a long, long time. And we've just been friends. Our daughters, became friends, all kinds of things. It's such a joy. Welcome to the Church Planting Podcast.
Thanks, Greg. So fun to be with you today. Thanks for the ask. I've been looking forward to the conversation.
Jon, you wear a lot of hats. I mean, you are the co-leader, co-founder of Community Christian in Chicago, which is arguably the church throughout the United States that's known for championing multiplication and church planting, maybe more than any other. The influence you guys have had, you and your brother Dave, over the years has been astonishing. You're involved in the New Thing Network, co-founder of that as well, which is planting churches throughout the United States and around the world and multiplying like you guys speak of. Let's talk about your early journey. So you and your brother Dave, it's a unique situation, but how did this come about? Where you guys, team leadership's a big deal in church planting and in church leadership today. Mm-hmm. Talk about how yours kind of began.
Yeah, man, good question. And it's funny, it began at the dismay of my mom and dad. How about that?
Yeah, fair enough.
They were like,
nobody's going to have any money in our family.
Right, exactly. You guys aren't really going to do this, are you? And no, Dave and I both had great experiences growing up. My dad was like a pastor's pastor. Like the real deal, authentic. I always say the problem with having parents like mine is I have no excuse.
Yeah, right.
If I mess up, it's my own fault. I cannot blame them.
Same with your children.
Well, yeah, maybe not. I'm not like my dad. I still aspire to that, and he's still preaching and still.
Oh my goodness!
At 84, yeah, he can't be stopped. But Dave and I recognized, I think, somewhat early on, later high school, early college, there's gifts of leaders, communicating, a passion to see people really experience the love of Jesus. And so if we could do anything, what would it be? It'd be like, well, let's start a church. My dad started a church. That's just kind of what you do, right? And we were, arrogant enough, I think, at that point, and maybe, naive to think we could, do it better than it was already being done. And so we had our own ideas. And so, and we're really good friends, quite frankly, Greg. And so in some ways it was a bit of a no-brainer. Well, why would we not do this together? Dave's 2.5 years older than me. That's a kind of a healthy distance, but like close enough that you could still be, you know what I mean? Like growing up, if I ever, beat him in anything, it was almost like the world shifted on its axis. I felt guilty almost when I won. Like, well, that wasn't supposed to happen.
Yeah.
So anyway, it just kind of made sense. I think we had some complementary giftings. We thought a lot alike, similar backgrounds, and it just kind of evolved that way.
And so when was that? How many years ago was it that you actually launched Community Christian?
Yeah, great question. 35 years. This is our 35th anniversary this year. Yeah. So I was 23.
Yeah.
Dave was 25. We had another guy on our team, Darren. Darren.
Yeah, of course.
Yeah, he was 21. His dad led a church planting organization here in Chicago.
I'm smiling, Jon, because at 23 is when I moved to Ireland to plant my first church. So both of us on that. So at 23, and I think sometimes I just want to encourage all of our church planters out there and young people listening, You and Dave launching a church together at 23. I'm flying to Ireland on my own, planting a church at 23. Call of God on our lives. And did we make mistakes? Absolutely. Did we wish we knew then what we know now? Absolutely. But man, I wouldn't change it for the world and what we've learned. And I just want to say on behalf of everyone listening, congratulations, Jon. 35 years is a fantastic run. I know your best years are ahead of you.
Well,
boy, keep going well, man. I appreciate it.
Well, thanks a lot. Yeah. I mean, and on my good days, I sit back and I go, man, this has been an incredible run. It's been hard, of course, at times, challenging, in some ways, not what I hoped, honestly, but in other ways, way more than I could have dreamed. And like you said, at 23, we had no money, we had no people, and no clue.
I've been there, man. I know what it is.
But it's like, you know what? We've got to remember we weren't that special, right? And so there's 23-year-olds out there right now that could run circles around us when we were 23. And so they need to be stepping into that kind of leadership, taking those kind of risks. And we need to take risks on them too.
Yeah, yes. And so let's fast forward now. We're 35 years later. And so you launch and, and then, in that process, I came back to Northern Ohio with my first really United States church. And really, we started growing up together at that point. We got to know each other pretty early on in the process. And, but I mean, Community Christian today, how many campuses do you all have now?
Yeah. So here's how we talk about it now. We're one church with 4 expressions. And so we have our physical locations, 7 across Chicagoland. We've got our Community Freedom, which is locations in local prisons. We've got micro churches, which are just taking off like crazy locally and actually globally, especially, which is really exciting to see. And then community.online.tv, which is our digital presence online. So
so the impact is immense. And then, of course, New Thing Network sprang out of there, which is, planting and networking churches all around the world now. Yeah. And then heavy involvement in the Exponential Conference and all their ordeals, I know as well. And just really fun things going on. So let me ask you this, yes or no answer, Jon. Mm-hmm. Would you advise church planters to start in team ministry?
Absolutely.
Okay. Now, so that's
as long as it's the right team.
Okay. So that's there right there is money. So as long as it's the right team. So let's delve into that a little bit. Okay. Give me a why behind team, and then we'll talk about who needs to be on the team and how do you know you have the right team?
Yeah, good question. Why team? Well, Jesus was not a lone ranger, right? He had the 3 that were close to him. He had the 12 that he circled around him. So I think you can make a case scripturally over and over again that, it's not really lone rangers. Most people at least had somebody that was alongside them that they were working together. And I think just from a resiliency factor, I think, complementary gifts. The Lone Ranger it's just not a good model. I think there leads to burnout. It's so easy to kind of get caught up in your own reviews and think of yourself higher than you ought to. And I think the team keeps you from doing that. And then just the many tasks that are demanded. No one person can pull it off. And so, on so many reasons to start with a team.
And so, Jon, I appreciate all those reasons. And you guys are unique because your co-leadership, your team leadership has lasted for 35 years. That in itself is very, very rare. Mm-hmm. I personally, I had a co-leader and it was fabulous for a number of years. I know other leaders that I've talked to that had team leadership and co-leadership, and it was fabulous. But I think we have to recognize too, that as you go into team leadership, there are going to be times when one of the leaders or several of the leaders are going to transition into different ministries and different areas, right? And we have to kind of go in with our eyes wide open, knowing that the tracks may diverge at some point.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. And I think we probably need to make a distinction between team leadership and co-leadership.
Yeah, good.
When I was speaking earlier, I was speaking more of team. I think I still would be, I would still be an advocate for co, but that's a different ballgame. And I think that takes a different kind of relationship. And in some ways, I think the unique nature of my relationship with my brother Dave, just kind of sets that a little bit apart. Not that it can't be done, but it takes it to a little bit different level. you and I have talked before. Dave and I were great friends growing up. We knew each other. We thought a lot alike. We had similar experiences. I think us being in team leadership, in some ways was, I guess, easier or, I know what he's thinking before he says it. You know what I'm saying? That kind of stuff. And I feel like it's a little bit of an unfair advantage that we've had working together.
Okay. So let's, for the sake of this podcast, we're going to be talking about team leadership, not co-leadership. I want us to focus on that because that's really what we're seeing in healthy church plants right now is the team leadership aspect. So let's talk about who do you need on your team? What kind of gifting do you need on your team? How do you know if you have the right team or the wrong team?
Yep. Yeah. Good question. And, guys, there's, who wrote the book? There's a guy that talks about, there needs to be a visionary and integrator. It escapes you right now.
You guys probably wrote the book. You guys have written the book on everything. So
no, but I think you do need some complementary gifting. And so if you're the visionary and you like to be out front all the time, then you've got to have somebody that can come alongside you that's able to like help execute on that strategy, on that vision, and ensure that it's communicated across the teams and across the people that are going to be affected by that vision.
John, let's stop there a minute because the reality is, I don't know that I've ever met anyone that was gifted in both of those areas. Like most individuals have a greater strength in one area than the other. And so to try to set ourselves up to do both is almost a recipe for disaster.
Yeah, I would completely agree. And truthfully, Dave and I both lean towards the visionary side, and neither one of us are necessarily the integrator, pure integrator at all. We can both kind of do that when we need to. And you've probably seen that even in the times that we've worked together and you and me and Dave have worked together, but neither one of us are super strong on it. And so if we were to actually design a team to start over, I'm not sure that you'd look at our gifting and say, hey, those two be on the same team from the beginning. So, and in a lot of ways, I think God's blessed community and done way beyond we could ever ask to imagine in spite of that fact. Okay. But there are times, of course, across the history of community where I would say, you know what, we were so constantly kind of pushing out on the edge that we didn't always build the systems and structures in order to kind of support that and sustain that.
You guys built the plane in the air. Like everybody knows that.
Yeah, right. And so I think, there's some things if you look back and go, if I was to coach that team or those guys or that church,
what would you say?
Probably really need to have somebody that's really more of a systems kind of structure integrator, because there's more than enough vision. You know what I mean? And again, God's blessed us. And then over the years, we surrounded ourselves, I think, with people that were really gifted in that way.
Okay, so you're starting out as a church planter in 2024, 2025, and you're putting together your team and you're looking for, you got to have someone who's the point visionary leader. You've got to have a systems, maybe processes person. Anybody else on the team that you'd say, man, if you're going in order, then, who else would you look for?
Yeah, well, and we're kind of making assumptions about what kind of church plant we're talking about here too.
Okay, talk about that because
I think that's where it's tough because we're kind of, at least the line of this conversation is going down the path of like launch large, right?
Yes,
yes, well funded. This is going to be supported by a number of churches and organizations, and there's probably going to be a strategy to have a big day where you start, and so you're talking about a fairly decent sized team, maybe 2 to 3 or more even full time people. And so, I think if you have that visionary, the kind of the lead point person, then you start thinking about roles and functions on a church plant. If you're going to have a Sunday experience, then you got to have somebody that's going to be thinking about like the worship experience more from an arts perspective, right? You might need to be thinking, okay, well, what about that person that's going to think about community engagement? What about that person that's going to think about student and youth? And so really it starts to come down to like, okay, what is this church going to actually look like once you launch? And how are we going to ensure that it's led in a way that's going to, fulfill those different functions that you need to have from the beginning?
Okay. And so I appreciate all that. And we need to talk about launch large, but let's shift gears a little bit because let's talk about micro and co-vocational and bi-vocational, because what we're seeing are very, very amazing expressions of those church planting realities in the United States right now and around the world. Probably some of the most effective. And I think you and I would both agree that in the future, the next decade, that those probably will be on the increase and more.
Yep.
I think about, if I were to launch a church in Cleveland right now, I wouldn't come in with launch large. This is a post-Christian community, and I think micro is the way to go here. And speaking of that, so we have a Francis Chan plant that's I just found out because they're using Stadia's services and stuff, and he moved in. He's a block from our condominium, and so I'm having coffee with him in 2 weeks, and because I'm really excited to see, could we be part of that, or how could we support?
Right. Yeah.
But talk about team leadership in that kind of aspect where maybe you don't have all the funding, but you're still, you're not coming in to start one micro church. You're coming in to start 100 micro churches in Chicago or Cleveland.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think there's still the team leaders that comes into play. And I'm excited about micro because I think it does kind of, deprofessionalize this whole thing. There's so much pressure on the leader, the point person of a large church. And I think in a lot of ways, there's so few people that are probably really capable of doing that from day one, or should even consider it from day one. Whereas I think the micro just gives you a chance to start small, start in your neighbors, kind of do a proof of concept, right? Like get that thing going where you are and show that you can integrate yourself into the community. You can actually attract, non-believers to gather together and multiply that thing, identify an apprentice and see if you can multiply that several times. And then if you need a larger gathering, well, then gather those micros or those small groups together for a gathering that supports what's happening really on the micro level.
I think in the micro level, the co-vocational and bi-vocational, and I love, we have, again, just because Cleveland's my hometown, we have a co-vocational pastor up here and that launched a church in the Hispanic community that's wildly successful, in my opinion. I think after 2 years, they're reaching 200 plus people, and she has never received a paycheck from the church and had no intention of doing that. But from day one, her thing was she raised some funds to build a team at some very low part-time salaries, and then used a bunch of volunteers. And I think in some way, Jon, I want to hear your thoughts on this. There's some benefit to that because there are some high capacity leaders out there that are looking for a ministry opportunity. But they don't want to be on the staff full time. Yep. Are you seeing that?
Yeah, I think so. And I think there's probably people, as you look at like folks that are, moving into the later part of their careers, especially that have additional time, maybe financially they're at a place where they're doing okay. So they don't need to draw a salary. And yeah, I think we've got to cast a vision for them. I mean, we had the first night of our small group, met in this right here behind me last night, and we just launched new term, super fun. We probably had half a dozen, I want to be careful here, 4 or 5 people that had never been in a small group before, ever.
Yeah, very cool.
And in some ways, it's kind of a micro church, but there's a few people here that came last night that, they're in that space where, they're trying to figure out, okay, what's next? And they're, in their 50s.
Looking for purpose, meaning, yes.
Looking for purpose, looking for meaning. And, one of the guys, he and I are meeting, twice a month now, and I'm kind of helping him kind of figure out what that could look like for him. He had a really successful run at like a wealth management kind of career. He's turning that over to some other people, but he's like really smart when it comes to money and finances and has a great biblical perspective on stewardship. And so the gifts that he can bring to our church and this community and that could be huge. Another woman who came out of the consulting world, and she's getting involved with our community engagement, our community freedom. So I think looking for people to fill some of those
So church planters that are listening, senior pastors that you want to multiply, you're hearing us. We're encouraging you. Look for those people, empower them, apprentice them, develop them as the next multipliers, because I think, Jon, there's a lot of those people out there right now. And we've got to tap into them. Okay, let's shift gears a little bit. We talked about some of the upsides to planting as a team, the longevity, the health, the accountability, even unique gifting. What are some of the downsides? What are some of the perils, if you will, the pitfalls that you'd say, hey, watch out for this?
Yeah, good question. And I don't, overall, I think team is the only way to go. I think you have to really recognize who you're inviting to be on that team. And I think you have to, as the leader, you got to set the right tone. You got to set the right environment for that. And I think, you as the leader have to help people recognize the value that they bring to that team and remind them of that over and over again.
Good. That's good.
I think, there's still this sad and unfortunate kind of mentality that everybody wants to focus on the leader. Who is the person that's in charge? And, church culture does that too. Culture does that to us. We're all wanting to like elevate this one person to the top. And so I think it's on the primary leader to create a culture by which, he or she is recognizing the people on that team, the contributions that they make, recognizing them publicly, privately, and really setting a table by which everybody recognizes their contribution and feels the value that they bring to the team.
Okay. And, what about tensions within? In the team, you've been in that senior leadership role. How important is it to deal with the tension or challenges that are going to arise?
So first of all, one of the things that we've said for quite a while at Community is when you're on this team, and I'm talking about our lead team, but this would go to any team that's starting anything. You've always got to believe the best. You've got to that's got to be like your default position. And if you get into a situation where you don't feel like you can believe the best in somebody else on your team, then you got to follow up on that immediately. If you can feel yourself slipping on that and you're starting to assume bad things about other people on that team.
Oh, that's good.
That's really, really dangerous. I mean, there's going to be times when people on your team, they're going to be a total knucklehead and you're going to get aggravated, right? I mean, that's going to happen. You got to give him or her the benefit of the doubt. Chances are they didn't mean it, or they didn't see it, or they didn't realize it. And so you got to treat them and think of them the way you would want to be treated and you would want to be thought of had you done something that was a knucklehead move, right? And I know that sounds basic.
We all have.
It's so easy to slip into that and not believe the best. I think that's just absolutely crucial. And then you got to find the courage to speak the truth in love, man. And, even at the risk of hurting somebody's feelings. I think so often we let things go way too long, and you got to nip that in the bud and take care of that right away.
And, Jon, I think as senior leaders, so in my days as senior pastor of the River Tree movement, and then now at Stadia, I want people around me that are going to challenge in my thinking. In all of the leadership things, like iron sharpens iron. Like I'm a big proponent of, hey, let's go at it in chaos with each other, and the product will come out better in the end. So I don't think you want this authoritarian leadership, right? Speak to that a little bit.
Yeah. Oh, for sure. I think, I've been in enough circles and situations where somebody will come to you complaining about their leader or their lead pastor. And you're like, okay, look, stop complaining and get on board or go somewhere else and do it better. And if that sounds harsh, but you can't afford to sit in that very long at all, because obviously you've stopped believing the best in that person, and you've got to resolve that. You've got to take care of that. You've got to go to that person and let them know. And if you can't get behind that, then there's plenty of places to lead somewhere else.
Boy, that's good. That's so valuable. Okay, Jon, we've talked about, so a lot of people yeah. Jump in.
I think this is speaking more as the team member. Recognize the advantages and benefits of not being the lead person. I think it's so easy to kind of feel like, well, if I was or if I wasn't. And, I in the relationship I have with Dave, like Dave's the lead pastor. I'm not the lead pastor. Now, he never has treated me like an employee or like I wasn't, fully a partner with him. And on our lead team, we've always kind of had this rule where it's like 2 of 6. Whereas there's 6 people on our lead team. And if we get to a point where we can't decide something, then Dave and I can kind of go decide.
Yep, that's good.
That's good. But Dave always includes me in that process.
Yep.
But, there's advantages I've had to not being that person. I've never been on our elder board. Dave's always been the only lead.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Yeah. I don't go to those meetings. And you know what? Honestly, I've never wanted to. And it's kind of nice not having to.
Yeah, no, there's benefits to that.
When we receive criticism as a church publicly, guess what? I'm not always the guy that's in the crosshairs. Dave is more than me because he's that title. Now, we bear the weight together. We're talking about how to resolve it together. But
that gives you longevity, though. Yeah.
when we've had hard news to deliver to the congregation. I feel the weight of it for sure. And Dave and I go off and we talk about it, but guess who's mostly the person that has to deliver that?
Yeah.
It's Dave. So I have to remind myself at times, I got a pretty sweet gig. All right. I have a lot of authority, but I don't have all the responsibility.
Yeah.
And I think it's easy when you're not the lead guy to feel like, man, if I had the authority, well, guess what? With that authority comes some responsibility you might not want.
Okay, let's talk about one of the most overlooked things in building a team. And so a lot of times we'll look for competency in a team member. And boy, don't skip that. You need to be building a team with competency. We talk about a lot about the character piece. And of course, that should be the first thing you're looking at is the character of the team leaders. But the other one, Jon, is the chemistry piece. How important is the chemistry of the team when you're putting that launch team together?
Oh, I think chemistry is huge. Maybe more so in the launch phase than any other time. I would say, our lead team here, and that's kind of the team that I think through because that's my first team. Lencioni talks about you got to have your first team, identify your first team. Your loyalty has to be to that first team.
Yep.
And you've got to have chemistry there. And I think early on, especially, and if we're going back to this idea of, building kind of a team of maybe even 2, 3, 4, 5, could be a combination of full-time, part-time, volunteer staff. When you're starting off, you're going to be spending so much time together. You're going to be establishing the culture for that community, for that church moving on that honestly will and potentially could have impact for years, if not decades.
Yeah.
What's happening in that initial team is crucial. And I think the chemistry there, it's going to be multiplied. It's going to be seen and experienced and felt by outsiders. And they're going to tell, like, if there's not good chemistry there, they're going to recognize that. And nobody's going to want to be a part of the community that doesn't have good chemistry at the core.
Okay, let's shift gears a little bit. I want to go personal with you. On a personal note, if you're watching this, and I know we have a lot of listeners and viewers that watch the Church Planting Podcast as well. I have a black eye. I was playing pickleball. A little embarrassing to say, but pickleball accident, if you're wondering why I have a black eye. And no, Jon, I'm not going to tell you.
Dangerous sport of pickleball.
It's a nasty sport.
If you were playing hoops and you got elbowed or something, but everybody would know we're too old for that now.
So Jon, I've always wanted to ask you this: the favorite book that you've ever written? You've written like a ton of books, a plethora of books. What's your favorite one you've written?
Yeah, great question. Well, I've been fortunate. We have been able to write about a half a dozen. Dave and I together. Exponential was really fun because that was the story of our church. It's a little bit old now. I think
great read. It's a great
2010. And our dream for that book was that people would pick it up and go, wow, if these guys could do it, anybody can do it. And it's just super practical. I think there's still a lot of principles that are really good. But honestly, I think right now, Greg, and part of it's what we talked about earlier with whole micro, churches and the opportunity that micro church gives you really focus, I think locally. It's our most recent book, and it's Bless. And it's just the practical way that gives people hands-on tools to be about loving their neighbors and seeing people the way Jesus saw people and loving people the way Jesus saw people. And it's really getting pretty remarkable traction, honestly. And I think it's because we've all been frustrated with our attempts to evangelize when, we're just trying to make it simple. Just, begin with prayer, listen to people, have conversations, share meals, eat, right? Serve them, look for practical ways. And then when you get a chance, share your story. And that group that I had in my living room last night, part of it is from living out these blessed practices. The other night, Lisa and I had over here at our dining table, we had 8 people from our neighborhood over for dinner. And, we're just kind of trying to bless them and figure out, I don't know when or if they'll show up on a Sunday. They might. But hopefully they're seeing Jesus in and through us. And eventually that'll lead to conversations that, will help them experience Christ.
Jon, I have so appreciated Bless. And, we live in a condominium complex that has 140 units in 12 buildings. But in our particular building, there are 16 condominiums. And this past Labor Day, Julie and I just did an open house brunch, and we invited everyone in our building and said, hey, we'll have you bring something to eat, and we're going to open our home from 10 to noon. And, we supplied the coffee and the juice, and I think some mimosas and some things like that. And, and then people came, and we had 24 people in our home.
That's
and
great.
It was based on that principle. How can we bless those that were,
Greg, I got to ask you too, because we have some similar experiences, I think, in that regard, in terms of like moving into the city. I've been on the north side of Chicago now for 14 years, and I know you're in Cleveland, and I would just say that has somehow ramped up, I think, my own evangelistic passion and our opportunities to apply these blessed principles in a whole and new way. And if I could put a commercial in too, if you haven't looked at the app, the Bless app.
No, I haven't seen it. I will.
You go to, if you look on anywhere you get like your app, the Apple Store, whatever, just look up Bless app, or you can go to the blessapp.com. And, one of the frustrations I think pastors have is like, we want our people engaged. We think they are, but we're not really sure. Well, this app actually allows people to kind of keep track of their engagement. It's almost like a scorecard in some ways. And then as a pastor, if your people indicate what church they go to, you can actually have that rolled up and see the engagement of the people in your church and what they're doing. It gives you like a map. It identifies your neighbors, and you can take little notes, on your interactions with them. Anyway, sorry for the commercial.
So what's the name of the app? It's just Bless app, I think.
Bless app. Yep. And if you go to the Bless app, theblessapp.com, you can find more out about it. You could also get someone who would be happy to.
This is really fun. I'm downloading it right now, and everyone should.
I want to hear back from you, man. It's pretty. I've really enjoyed it. It's been really cool.
Okay, so and then the other thing, I'm going to give you a commercial, because I was looking back at my bookshelves here, and I think I have all of your books on my shelves, Jon, and I've read them all. And if you haven't read all of Jon Ferguson and Dave Ferguson's books, read them. They're practical. My favorite's Hero Maker. It had a profound influence in my life. And thank you for leading well for 35 years. I'm looking to see what God's going to do for the next decade, at least, in your life and beyond that, because you're going to be like your dad and go forever. And thanks for being an author and influencer, Jon, and just for being such a good friend. Love partnering with you. New thing. Stadia's great friend and big fan.
No, Greg, feelings mutual. Love the fact you're doing this podcast and kind of getting the word out, and have just so enjoyed our friendship and the chances we've had to travel together, be a part of the Exponential board, and just work together for, advance the kingdom and in some pretty fun ways.
Thanks, Jon.
Thanks for listening to the Church Planting Podcast, part of the Stadia Podcast Network. To find more great episodes and to see how Stadia can help you start thriving, growing, multiplying churches for the next generation, be sure to check out stadia.org/podcasts.